Okay. Good morning. It's good to see everybody in person and not, little Zoom screens. So this is the fourth shiur of this mini series, or maybe at four, with four shiurim. So I guess it's no longer a mini series of the series. But anyway, we're dealing with issues of authority in halacha and in Jewish thought. So I came to a little bit of an impasse because the topic isn't directly related to this week's Parsha. Normally I try to keep to the Parsha, but it really isn't. Though we will see one connection in a minute. It does. There is a link to it, but. So I was trying to decide, should I continue with the series or go with the Parsha? So I decided to go with next week's Parsha, Parsha Balak, and that way, you can, keep your notes for next week and you can talk about it. So it's for next week's Parsha, and we finish the series, and we'll be talking about something which is, I guess, maybe a breakdown of authority. In other words, is there a place? What place is there in halacha, if any, for vigilantism and for basically bypassing those bodies of authority that exist? There is. I'll just also mention something I'm not going to get into. There is a parallel area of halacha, which is perhaps. I hope, certainly, a more practical question than vigilantism, though the world we live in, I'm not sure this hasn't become a practical question as well. But and that's what's in Dinei Mamonot, in civil law, the concept of avid inish dina linafshe. A person can, under certain circumstances, take the law into his own hands. In other words, if there isn't a clear-cut course of action through the courts, there are times that we allow the parties themselves to basically put facts on the ground. So I'm not touching that area at all today. That's a related area, a parallel area, but I'm not going to be talking about it, but it's something that you should be aware that exists, and maybe, Bezrat Hashem, some future shiur, we will talk about it more at length. So in next week's Parsha, the end of next week's Parsha, in Parshat Balak, so the Torah tells us, Vayeshev Yisrael Vashitim, Vayachel Ha'am Liznot El Benot Moav. So Am Yisrael reached this place Shittim, and the people begin to stray with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people to in general in the pagan world. So pagan practices and all sorts of sexual activity are wrapped up one in the other, and so as part of this znut, so there's also avodah zarah, vayitzamed Yisrael leval Peor, and Yisrael became attached to Baal Peor. That's the avodah zarah of Moab. Vayicharaf Hashem b'Yisrael, and God's anger was taken out on Yisrael. Vayomer Hashem Moshe kacha kol v'shayam v'okatam Hashem neged Hashemesh v'yashov charon af Hashem Yisrael. So it's very interesting. So the first response in terms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to tell Moshe, so act accordingly. Take the authorities and do what you need to do. Vayomer Moshe Shoftei Yisrael, and so Moshe does exactly that. He turns to the judges and he says, Hirgu ish anashav hanitzmadim leval Peor. In other words, here you have a situation, so go and exercise your authority, and if need be, execute the people who are guilty of the capital crime. V'hinei ish mibnei Yisrael ba. And now we have the story within that context. The the subtext. Hinei ish b'bnei Yisrael ba vayakrev elachav el midyanit le'nei Moshe le'nei kol adat b'nei Yisrael v'hema bochim petach ol moed. So a person here, he's not mentioned by name. He's only going to be mentioned in the following parsha, in Parshat Pinchas. But the Zimri ben Salu, but he takes the Midyanit in front of everyone. This flagrant violation, and basically he's flouting the courts. Because remember, the courts have been set up already. But here he's flouting it, and for whatever the reason, it's not clear. The Hema Bochim Petach Oel Moed. The authority structure is unable to deal with this. Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen vayakom mitoch ha'ida vayikach lomach biyado. So within that context, Pinchas gets up, takes his spear. Vayavo achar ish Yisrael al akuba vayidkor et shneihem. So he comes from behind the cubicle, wherever they are, vayidkor et shneihem et ish Yisrael ve'et ha'isha al kovata v'te'atza magefa me'al b'nei Yisrael. And so he literally skewers the two of them together, and that stops the magefa. Now, and vayu ha'meitim b'magefa arba ve'esrim aleph, 24,000 people died by comparison. In last week's parsha, in Parsha Korach, when there is also a magefa, so there the death toll is 14,400. So this is a worse magefa than what we saw last week, and it stopped also by the action of an individual. In the case of last week, it was Aharon at the behest of Moshe taking the Ketoret. Here it's the action of Pinchas, his grandson, to a more violent form, but that stops the Magefa. And here it's not at the behest of Moshe. That's what's important. This is the first time Aharon, if you want to compare those two, Aharon is moving forward at what Moshe says. Now the Torah hadn't mentioned the Magefa. Just, again, I'm not going to be dealing with all of these issues. This is more of a Parshanut question. But when you're looking at it, the Torah hadn't mentioned that there's a Magefa going around. Well, the Torah had just said, God says, okay, you have a problem, right? Deal with it. And Moshe begins to deal with it, and then things get out of hand. But the fact that there's a Magefa, so that we only find out at this point. Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen eshiv chamatim el bnei Yisrael bekano et keti. This is the beginning of Parshat Pinchas. B'tocham v'lo chiliti et bnei Yisrael b'kinati lachen amar hineni noten lo et briti shalom. And so therefore, I say, give him my covenant of peace. V'ayta lo ulzaro acharav brit kunat olam tachat asher kinei lelokav v'yichaper al bnei Yisrael. So he has earned this covenant because he has been zealous for his God, and he has atoned for Bnei Yisrael. Well, again, from a Parshanut perspective, so there's a lot of things to be comparing this to. We should be comparing this to, as I said, to the Magefa with Korach. We should also be, of course, comparing it to the story of the Egel. It's there. Also, there is a need for kanaut. There's a need for zealotry, except there the zealotry is also is Moshe, who is the catalyst for that. He's the one who says Mila Shem Elai, and the Leviim gather around him, and they go ahead and they kill not one person, but they kill 3,000 people. But that is again a parallel, and in an even larger question, we begin in this week's Parshat Chukat, we begin all of these stories of the last year of the desert, starting, of course, with the story of the hitting of the rock. So all of these stories, and this is one of those stories, need to be compared to their parallels in the first year in the desert. If you're taking a look at the Parsha, so you'll see that there are many, many stories where they're basically not quite a mirror image, maybe it's sometimes a bizarro mirror image of the story that takes place in the first year and now it's in the 40th year, and there are differences in there, or so all sorts of parallels and all sorts of differences. Spoiler alert, I'll tell you that and here Pinchas is perhaps the primary one. The answer for the difference is that whether the response comes from the ground roots, from the grassroots, from the ground up, or it comes from above. In the first year, all of the responses are above, and in the 40th year, all the responses are from below, and the rest go learn. Yes, questions? Yeah.
It's a whole different context than much earlier. I don't know if you would relate it all to Yosef's brothers, Shimon and Levi.
Right. Correct. That's an early form of zealotry, and the question of whether or not that's something which is something that we look up to. I'm not touching that right now. But you're absolutely right that that's something to be taken into account, and it's Levi, by the way, that's always is involved. Right. In other words, you have Levi is the one there. There's Levi at the Egel, and now you have Pinchas from Shevet Levi who's doing the work here too.
So why is this considered Kanaut? Because you read in the pasuk, Moshe says, "Kill them."
Right.
So apparently, Pinchas is just doing what is executed. Merely, he's executing Correct. The appropriate punishment.
Correct.
So what's the big deal?
Okay, I'll answer in a second. Yeah.
On the other hand, this seems like a rather an emotional response as opposed to otherwise, and we're told that we should have some sort of self-control in terms of our behavior.
Right.
Purely emotional response.
Right. And so so there is this question, okay, and maybe, come on, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Phil, okay. So,
He doesn't say that, he just says Vayar, and he saw it.
Okay, so I don't know whether it's emotional or not, so okay.
Well, that seems emotional. If somebody sees something and reacts, and even, I'm thinking in terms of ourselves, in terms of our own response to events.
Right. So let's take a look. Let's take a step back for a second. Now? I didn't bring. There's so much that I could have brought that I didn't bring. So there is a lengthy discussion in the Gemara and Midrashim in terms of discussing basically these type of issues. In other words, why the idea, what fell apart with the courts? Why weren't they dealing with it? Why are they crying, etc.? And is Pinchas's actions within the rubric of the halacha, as well? And the feeling is in Chazal that it's not within the rubric of the halacha. It's getting to obviously to what God had wanted to do, right? And that's why he gets Briti Shalom. But the fact that God has to give him this covenant, right, is also indicative, right, that there are. And this is very clear in the midrashim, in that subtext of the discussion, that there's a lot of, if you will, anger within the context of the people, very similar to what we saw last week's parsha, when there is a type of magefa, and there's action on the part of people who are, in that case, the leadership. Here it's from Vayakom mitoch ha'eda. He's coming from specifically from not within the leadership perspective. He's not one of the Rashi Shvatim. He's not one of the Shoftim. He's not authorized to do anything, right? And he does something. And so there are, as I said, we could spend the whole shiur, and maybe if it was a Parshat Pinchas shiur or Balak shiur, we would talk about that. But I want to focus on the vigilantism on a larger area. But you're right. So the question is where we'll take both of your comments and we'll correctly. Namely that on the one hand, it's getting the job done, the job that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had said explicitly that he wanted to get done, and on the other hand, it's, I don't know if the emotional is necessarily the right word,
anger.
But it's clearly anger. It's zealotry. It is it's vigilante justice. We'll put it that way. Okay? In other words, whether it's justified or not, it's vigilante justice. It's not. It's from outside of the. It's from the authorities who are society that's given the authority to deal with it. Now, is this something which is positive? So you take a look at the Torah and you'd say, yes, it's something which is positive. And by the way, getting back to your point, that in Shimon and Levi, the Torah there is ambiguous. If you read the story and you finish at Parshat Vayishlach, you think that Shimon and Levi definitely did the right thing. Right? But when you go on to Parshat Vayechi, so then you see Yaakov, 50 years later, gives them a curse for what they did. Right? The question is, what did he curse them for? And maybe I'll mention that at the end. But so here it's only positive, right? Here Pinchas, who was not really a Kohen until this moment, becomes a Kohen. Right? He was the way that Chazal understand it is that only people who were born to Kohanim would become Kohanim, except for those specific Kohanim, Aaron and his sons, who were consecrated at the time of the Mishkan. Pinchas was already born. Torah tells us in Parshat Vayera that he's born explicitly, and so he is sort of in between. He's not going to be born to Elazar the Kohen, and he's not yet, but at the same time, he wasn't consecrated. So here he gets his consecration, and it's very ironic. It's called a Brit Shalom, and it's been accomplished through this act of violence. In many Sifrei Torah, there's a Masorah to break the Vav of Shalom. It's a broken Vav. Right? But if you take a look at it, you think, oh, it's a Pasal Sefer Torah. There's a crack in the Vav. That is the Masorah, to crack that Vav, because the Vav of Shalom has been shaken and has been achieved through violence. So, how do we look at it? And the truth is, this is something which has been looked at least since the time of the Chashmonaim, specifically. And here I'm just taking a quote from Sefer Maccabim Aleph, right, which is the earlier Sefer Maccabim, and and this is just since we only have the Greek, so I took the English translation as opposed to the Hebrew translation. When Matityahu saw this, he was fired with zeal, stirred to the depth of his being. He gave vent to his legitimate anger, threw himself on the man, and slaughtered him on the altar. This is the story where he has this person is sacrificing outside of the Beit HaMikdash, sacrificing a pig, if I recall, on to one of the Greek gods. At the same time, he killed the king's commissioner who was there to enforce the sacrifice and tore down the altar. In his zeal for the law, he acted as Pinchas had against Zimri, son of Salu. Right? So explicitly, the Matityahu is being associated with his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, right, going back, or his the other Kohen. He's a Kohen. This is same type of idea that Pinchas is doing. Then Matityahu went through the town shouting at the top of the voice, "Let anyone who has zeal for the Lord take his stand on the covenant, come out and follow me." And there's a combination of Mila Shem Elai. In other words, he's basically now coming and saying, okay, we're starting the revolt against the Greeks at this moment, and this is the Pinchas Egel merge, if you will. Okay, so this is the idea, and of course, this is something which is considered to be very very positive. Right? That's what we celebrate Hanukkah for. Right? That we are celebrating this kind of zealotry, or the results of the zealotry that led to the reconsecration of the Mikdash. We're going to another take a. You know what? Maybe let's skip number 3 for a moment. Okay, and we'll come back to it in a second. You may have already read it, but we'll come back to it. Let's take a look at number 4. There's a pasuk in the Torah. Torah says that, and it's in the middle. Parshat. It's in Perek Yudchet, pasuk Chav Aleph of Vayikra. It's in the middle of the Parsha of the Arayot. It's in the middle of the Parsha where all of the illegitimate sexual relations that are banned by the Torah are mentioned. We read it at Yom Kippur at Mincha time. And there, in the middle of all of this, the Torah tells us, "Umizaracha lo titen lavir lamolech," and also do not give your children to Molech, to that avodah zarah, which was worshipped with whether it's child sacrifice. We'll say child sacrifice. V'lo techalel et shem Elokecha ani Hashem, and do not defile the name of your God. I am Hashem. Now, that's the pshat. And if you take a look at the, let's say, Targum Onkelos, that's what he translates it as. The Targum Yerushalmi, which is a Targum of the late Bayit Sheni period, so he says the following: Min zarech lo titen b'tashmita letzad bat amimim lemava lepruchanim nuchra'o v'lo tafis yatshmad alakach ana Hashem. So the translation of that, and of thy offspring you shall not give up any to lie carnally with the daughters of the Gentiles. What's la'avir lamolech? Is that you are allowing for relations, intermarriage and the like, to perform strange worship. And it was basically something along the lines of what happens with Baal Peor and Benot Moav. Nor shalt you profane the name of thy God, I am the Lord. So what that, in effect, is meaning is that, and if you take a look, for example, in Sefer Yovlim, Jubilees, so there is a death sentence for intermarriage and the like. In other words, that is something which at least a group of Jews felt in the Bayit Sheni period was something which was a capital crime. So here it is reflected in this Targum. Now, at the same time, the Mishnah, a little bit later, so the Mishnah says the following: Ha'omer, it's a Mishnah Megillah, Umizaracha lo titen lahavir lamolech, Umizaracha lo titen la'abra'ar ba'ar meyuta, mishatkin ota b'nezifa. So if someone who tries to translate that pasuk, it's in the context of a list of readings of the Torah, and at the time, which is the practice still kept by the Teimanim, of reading the Targum in shul. So if you were to read the Targum with regard to this pasuk of Mizaracha lo titen la'avir lamolech, and you would basically translate it along the lines of that Targum Yerushalmi, Mizaracha lo titen la'abra ba'amriyata, from your children you should not give to pass on to the non-Jewish woman, mishatkin otam b'nezifa. So then that person who's trying to translate it in that way is silenced, is shouted down, is censored. Right, B'nizifa, with a rebuke. Yeah.
How do you square this with the fact that by the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, they all came back, they all non-Jewish wives, and there wasn't a death penalty, they just had to get rid of them.
They had to get rid of them, etc. So, okay, in other words, maybe they had to deal with it.
Between death and
etc. Whether it with one of the biggest black holes, maybe the biggest black hole of Jewish history, is the Second Temple period. Right? We really know, even from what we have from Ezra and Nehemiah, right, it's sort of sketchy, but that's what we have. And then the next time that we have any real records, we're 300, 400 years later in the Chashmonaim period, right? What happens? I'll just give one example. I think I might have mentioned this example here before. That at the beginning you have the intermarriage, but you also have a major issue is Chilul Shabbat that goes on, and Ezra and Nehemiah deal with it explicitly. And many of our takanot, for example, Muktzah, according to Chazal, go back to that, dealing with the fact that people were too lax with their Shabbos observance. That's at the beginning. At the time of the Chashmonaim, there's a need for a takana of the Chashmonaim that people should fight on Shabbat. Right? So over the course of people were, there was a slaughter of 1,000 soldiers because they wouldn't pick up their weapons to fight the Greeks on Shabbat, and the Greeks knew that, and they would fight them specifically on Shabbat. So our notion of pikuach nefesh, okay, was it halachic, was it not halachic? I don't care about that right now. But but what I do see is that at the beginning of the period, you have a sense of, nobody is keeping Shabbat, or there's widespread chilul Shabbat, and at the 300 years later, people are so careful about Shabbat that they won't fight on Shabbat, right? So, and what happened in those 300 years, right? How did that happen? We have no idea. In other words, what were the cross currents during that time? No idea whatsoever. We have no record of that, right? So that's a lot of time. 300, 400 years is really a long time when you think about it. That from roughly 516 at the beginning of the return of until the Hashmonai period is 165 BCE. So that's well over 300 years. So that's a lot of time. So here we see that the idea of Kanaut as being something which is valued is very clearly embraced. And yet, and this is something which we will talk about, and I just took a quote from Professor Gerald Blitzstein, who wrote about 25 years ago in a piece, a very short piece of the in tradition, which he called the missing players in Chazal's understanding of Hanukkah. And his question basically was, everything. Well, I'll just read it. The Talmud does not know of Hellenizers, right? That the whole idea, right? When we talk about in schools that the Hanukkah is this battle against the Hellenists, etc. So that's not mentioned in the Gemara anywhere. At least not in the context of Hanukkah. It does not know of a Matityahu. Number three. It does not know of a Matityahu who kills a Jewish idolater. It does not further tell of a civil war as the genesis of Hanukkah. In other words, you read Sefer Maccabim, and it is, for so many people, it's a revelation that that's what was going on, right? We think of the story that the Greeks came in and they defiled the Beit HaMikdash and they went around defiling all the oil, and when you find that little cruise, right? The English obscure English words that only come up in Jewish context. They find a cruise of oil, right? And you go, we're fine, okay, and now it lasts for 8 days. Okay, that's basically what the Gemara tells us. But the whole context of the war and all of that which continued for several years afterwards, all of that is missing. Al Hanisim does tell the battle of the pure against the impure, the few against the many, the wicked against those who study Torah. But it's clear that this is a struggle of the Jewish people against the Gentile persecutor. Ironically, those who argue that Hanukkah delegitimizes any but authentic Jewish culture find their only sources for that reading outside the Talmud in works which never entered the canon of Jewish learning. That's a very ironic observation. Why repress memory of Jewish Hellenizers, the civil war, as the matrix of Hanukkah? I have no definitive answer or even suggestion. But then he does give a suggestion. Finally, the idea that a holiday could be the outcome of civil war between Jews, a proposition which encourages and legitimates intra-Jewish militancy, may simply have been unacceptable to Chazal. Indeed, the more immediate memory of the struggle against Rome, a struggle marked by intramural Jewish antagonism and even bloodshed, taught a different lesson. In other words, we learned the hard way that Kanaut doesn't always win, right? Sometimes it leads to what we call sinat chinam, and that tears a society apart and doesn't allow us to fight the enemies from without. And so, as a result, his argument is that yes, at a certain point in time, zealotry is something which is championed, and indeed Matityahu, and the author of Sefer Maccabim, is saying this is the modern day Pinchas. That's who Matityahu is. Right? We should be very proud of him. He's the modern day Pinchas. But a couple of hundred years later, when you have let's say, or a little bit more than a couple of hundred years later, in terms of Bar Kochba, right, who is arguably that generation's Pinchas, so that ultimately has disastrous consequences, and of course everything that goes on around 70 years earlier, around the time of the Churban. So that's something to keep in mind. Now that could very well be one of the reasons why, from the perspective of Chazal, the idea that we're going to have a targum, right, and say, and it's important to stress that it's not necessarily saying that it's an invalid way of understanding the pasuk. What it is invalid is to read it publicly as the targum of the pasuk. In other words, it's saying, oh yes, it could be that halachically there's going to be a dayah, and maybe that dayah even will be used at certain times, that we are going to punish this kind of activity, let's say intermarriage, with make it into one of the arayot and have a penalty of death, perhaps, compare it to Molech, maybe, but certainly we're not going to tell that to every Jew in the street. That's what the Mishnah is saying, and the Mishnah is, of course, is coming after Bar Kochba. One other example of this, but let's take a look at number 8, and then we'll come back to the number 7. The Mishnah gives us specifically what are the cases where we talk about Kenaim Pogim, but where we allow for the vigilante to act. And here the Mishnah says the following: Hagonev et hakasva, which we will not translate at the moment. Mikalel bekosem, if you use some wizardry to curse the name of God. Haboel aramit, and if a person who has illicit sexual relations with a non-Jewish woman, Kenaim Poginba. So then the zealots can act. Kohen sheshimash betuma, ein achav hakohanim mevi'in oto lebeitin, ela pirchei kahuna motziin oto chutz la'azara umaftzin et mocho b'gzirin. If a Kohen serves with Tuma, so then his brethren, the Kohanim, do not take him to a Beit Din to be judged, and there the penalty is malkot, it's lashes. It's not a death penalty for the Kohen to do that. It might be karet, but it's what the Beit Din can do is only lashes. Ela pirchei kahuna, the young Kohanim take him out of the Azara and split his head with axes. Very violent type of death. That's, so here's another example of the vigilantism where what they're supposed to do. Right? Very, very grisly. Okay. This, by the way, this is the intersection with this week's parsha, because in our parsha, just to understand, because what do all of these things have in common? I mean, why isn't Shabbos in there? Right? Avodah Zarah. Right? Take those actions, or even Gilui Arayot. We know that we have these Aveirot, which are cardinal sins, and they are sins that we say Yehareg Val Yavor. You should give your life and not violate it. So why don't we say those are the three that you have the ability for someone to act violent? What's the difference here? So the common denominator, and we have to understand each one of them. We'll talk specifically about two of them, the kasva and the boel aramid. It's not a question of the sin per se. So we're going to be talking about the sin in this context as well. But it's also a question, and maybe it's the primary question, of what that sin does, what the consequences of that sin are. Okay, what is so for example, what do I mean? I'll give it here from our Parsha, right? Beginning of the Parsha in Parshat Chukat. So when the Torah talks about Para Aduma, we're all, we are all enthralled by the details of the Para Aduma. But then the Torah says the following, and it says it twice, slightly different phrases, but the same basic idea. So here at the end of Rishon, we read it this morning, Kol hanogea bemet benefesh adam asher yamut. Anyone who touches a person who has died, v'lo yitchata, and he doesn't purify himself, et mishkan Hashem timeh, v'nichrita nefesh Yisrael. He has defiled the Mishkan. And a few psukim later, the Torah repeats the same idea, that the ish asher yitma v'lo yitchata, the person who becomes tameh and does not purify himself, v'nichrita nefesh mitocha kahal, he will be cut off from the community. Ki et mikdash Hashem timeh, because he has defiled the mikdash. In other words, the problem here that the Torah is saying with regard to someone who is serving betuma. Remember, this is where the Achav HaKohanim take him out of the Azara, because you can't kill him in the Azara, because that's going to just add more tuma to the mix. So, but you take him out and then you kill him, right? So that is because the larger concept of taking the Mikdash and defiling it. Okay, that is the problem, if you will. It's not the Avera itself. I'm not talking about killing him. I'm talking about just in terms of what the Torah is saying in terms of anyone who comes into the Mikdash when they're Tameh and they haven't gone through the purification of the Para Aduma. You are taking something which is sublime, the Mikdash, and you are, by bringing in, again, I don't know exactly why and how, that's the part of the chok, if you will, in terms of tuma, but it's that you have taken and you've brought the tuma into the mikdash, and the mikdash is, as a result, is defiled. That's the problem that the Torah, again, stresses twice with regard to the idea of in the parsha of Paradum and our parsha. So here, what the extent is that this is something which for us is very esoteric, right? We don't think of tuma as being and perhaps the reason why we don't think of tuma, I don't know if the halachot of tuma are that much more complex. They are, but they're not that much more complex than, I don't know, kashrut, right? Which we take as being okay. That's everybody grows up with that. Right, or the minushay, the details of Shabbat, right? And many other areas of halacha have similar details that Tumah V'Tara have. Why don't we care about Tumah V'Tara anymore? Because we don't have a mikdash. That's the bottom line. Since we don't have a mikdash, so we don't have the violation of the mikdash. We can live with tuma in the outside of the mikdash world, but in the mikdash you can't live with tuma. So, and as a result, all sorts of other things have fallen by the wayside, truma and the like. So, okay, that's the way it is, because all of the halachot of tuma are leading to this idea at mikdash Hashem timeh. And so in that context, this is one of the things that we have a notion of Kenaim Pogim, that vigilantism is allowed. So if you take a look, for example, at number 9, my kasva, what is this gonevet kasva? He steals the kasva. Amar Rav Yehuda, klei sharet. If you steal one of the vessels of the mikdash, v'cheinu omer ve'ekesot hadesach v'hecha remiza v'lo yavo lirot kivala et hakodesh v'aveitu v'hamakalel b'kosem tani Rav Yosef yakeh kosem et kosmo. Again, using this to both of these ideas are where basically you're taking a larger concept of, be it the mikdash, and you are taking things out of the mikdash as well, or you are going in terms of cursing God, if you can say so, Birchat Hashem, through the use of Avodah Zarah. Right? Can you think of a greater chilul than that? In other words, so when you're when you are undermining key core areas of Jewish holiness, so that's where Kenaim Pogim. You don't have time to wait. That's basically what the Mishnah is saying. Under these circumstances, you have to act immediately. Where does Boel et Aramit come into that formulation? Right, here's what Pinchas did. So here the Gemara says the following. Bagda quotes the pasuk in Malachi. Bagda, this is again line number 3 and number 9. Bagda Yehuda v'toeva nasta b'Yisrael v'Yerushalayim ki chilel Yehuda kodesh Hashem asher ahav ubal bat el nechar. So the Judah has Begida. No. Betrayed. Thank you. Has betrayed God. V'toeva nesta, an abomination has been done by Yisrael of Yerushalayim. Ki chilel Yehuda kodesh asher ahav ubal bat el nechar. Right? He has so this is talking about on a broader national scale in terms of bringing of Avodah Zarah, but the imagery is having relations with Baal Bat El Nechar. He has had relations with the daughter of a foreign god. So what is how does Chazal understood this? Ad Karei Rav the Gamre. So Rav mentioned this in order to teach it. Bagda Yehuda zo avodat kochavim. Ubal Bat El Nechar ze Bal Hanachrit. So this is somebody who has relations with a non-Jewish woman. Amrav Chia Barvuya kolabal anachrit ki'ilu mitchaten ba'avodah zarah dichtiv ubal bat el nechar v'chi bat yesh lo le'el nechar elazeh bal anachrit. Does the foreign god have a daughter? No, the foreign god does have a daughter, but if you have relations with the non-Jewish woman, it is the equivalent of doing this. What's the idea? So the argument is, and so first of all, we see from our parsha the interrelationship with the pagan worship, but also the question of whether the offspring of the marriage. This is one of the sources of the idea that we are all familiar with, that the offspring of whether it's marriage or just the relationship will not be considered to be Jewish. In other words, here the sanctity of the Jew, of the sanctity of the Jewish people, is being undermined by this relationship, because the offspring are going to be non-Jews. Here, there's a fascinating machloket which develops much later in the time of the Rishonim as to whether the focus is on the, if you will, the severity of the Avera, or this consequence that I'm talking about here. So here, just to give you a couple of sources. So number 10, so the Gemara itself, within the understanding of the idea, Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar, Ma Ra'a, what did Pinchas see? Amar Rav Ra'a Ma'aseh v'Nizkar Halacha. So Rav said he saw what was going on and he remembered the halacha. Amar lo, Achi Avi Abba. So my great uncle Moshe, Lo kach li matani beridcha mehar Sinai. Didn't you tell us when you came down from Har Sinai, Haboel et hanachrit Kenaim Pogim bo? That's a halacha that you told me. It's halacha l'Moshe miSinai. I remember learning it when you came down from Har Sinai 38 years ago. Amar lo karaina de igarta ihu lahave farvanuka. So the person who reads the letter should be the mailman. You should deliver it. Go ahead. Take what you need to do. What you need to do. Ushmuel amar ra'a she'ein chachma ve'ein tfuna ve'ein etzah leneged Hashem. Kol makom sheyesh chilul Hashem Ein chokin kavod l'Rav. Right? So Shmuel said that he understood. He didn't go to Moshe. He didn't. He said there's no time to go to Moshe. Right? I see there's Chilul Hashem that's going on, and that needs to be understood. Now, it's here it's not totally explicit, but perhaps the machlok between Rab and Shmuel in terms of understanding this is that simply that what Rab is saying that he remembered the halacha that this is a very severe avera, and this is the punishment. And whereas Shmuel said no, the problem was Chilul Hashem. And when it comes to Chilul Hashem, this happened to be the cause of the Chilul Hashem. But when it comes to Chilul Hashem, so then you act immediately. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Rabbi Elazar Ra'a Sheba Malach V'Hishchit Ba'am. So Rabbi Yitzchak said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, what did he see? He saw the results. He saw the Magefa. So at least according to Rabbi Yitzchak, perhaps. So it's sort of taken out of the halachic discussion. It's the only time that you're going to be able to act accordingly in this type of way, or at least the model of Pinchas, is because Pinchas sees the results. He sees 24,000 Jews dying in a terrible plague, and he says, okay, this is the cause. Right? That's along the lines of what Yonah says, if you will. The storm is because of me. Throw me over. Right? So, same type of idea. Pinchas understands the cause, or he thinks he understands the cause, and he happens to be right, and acts in that manner. So here how do we understand this, if you will, halachically? So the Rambam in here number 11 says the following: Lo pagu bo Kenaim v'lo hilko beitin. Let's say you have a situation, Zibri ben Salu. Gets away with it. What do you do then? Harei onsho mefurash b'divrei kabbalah shehu karet. So this is the punishment for this is karet. It's not in within the context of the Beit Din to punish. V'nikra mechalel kodesh Hashem. So this is called a person who is mechalel, that which is holy to God. And then the Rambam says what I said outside a moment ago. Avon ze afal pi she'en bo mitat beit din al yekal beinecha. So this particular avera, even though it doesn't have a mitat beit din, most of the arayot do. Right? So if you have a situation where, let's say, just adultery, right? So adultery has a death penalty attached to the people who are who are over that avera, but this doesn't, and perhaps it's the karet is bechalel shem Hashem, and perhaps it's only done, by the way, the chilul is only if it's being done in a public manner or not. So here. Al yekal b'einecha, el yesh bo hefsed she'ein b'chol ha'arayot k'moto, shaben min ha'erva binohu l'chol davar, u'v'chol Yisrael nechshav, afa pi shehu mamzer. So the offspring of an illicit relationship, generally speaking, is a mamzer, but is considered to be a Jew, l'chol davar, and has a relationship to both of his or her parents as any other child would. V'haben min hakutit eno beno. But a child of the offspring of a non-Jewish woman is not considered to be his son halachically. Shneimar ki asirat bincha me'acharai mesir oto miliyot achrei Hashem. So this is the ultimate, if you will, on a personal level, in terms of the chilul that you're going to have, is that you have the person is not going to be, the offspring is not going to be considered to be Jewish. And then the Rambam just adds one other line, the halachachet, v'zeh gorem lihidabek ba'akum shehivdilanu hakadosh baruch hu mehem v'lashuv me'acharei Hashem v'lim ol bo. And this will ultimately lead to assimilation, as we all know, and unfortunately we see rampant in our time as well. So this is the So this is the idea, if you will, of the Chilul Hashem, and that's the heter, if you will, the matir for the action at the specific time of the Avera for Kenaim Pogim bo. The Ramban, on the other hand, number 12, so he gives a slightly different way of understanding, which I think is more than just a slightly different understanding. She'im, he's talking about specifically the Gonevet HaKasva, Eno Michlal Mechayvei Mita Bidei Shamayim, Aval Hu Chamur Yoter, Shaharei Hu Chayav Mita Biyad Adam. Right, so he says that he's viewing Kenaim Pogim bo as being actually part of the is a part of the court system, if you will. In other words, we're introducing the vigilante into the court. If a person is allowed, if Pinchas is allowed under certain circumstances to kill Zimri, that means that Zimri is chayav mita for the action that he is doing at that moment. And that's what the Rav had said in the Gemara, right? The Pinchas turns to Moshe and said, "Didn't you teach us Kenaim Pogim bo? So go ahead and do it. You're the Kenai. Go and do it. You are the messenger of the court. You read the letter. You are the officer of the court who's now authorized without the court telling you explicitly. But you can go and do it." What the Ramban is saying is that these are Averot, perhaps because they cause the Chilul Hashem, where you have the Avera is such where the Kanai has the right to act at that moment for in order to fulfill the halacha. Okay, so with the few minutes that I have left, I'm not going to I'm not going to do all the Makorah, right? But I'll just want to, after having discussed that basic idea, that basic split, whether we're looking primarily at the Avera itself, or we are looking at the results and the consequences that are created by the infraction, as being the reason for the Kenaim Pogim bo. So let's just add a couple of other points. Let's go down to the last section. The question is, who can be the Kanai? Can anyone be a Kanai? I see it in that moment. Can I act? Right? Can I be Pinchas? Right? Can I be Matityahu? Right? As such. Right? Okay, I see it. I'm there. I'm seeing it. Can I do it? So it's very interesting. I don't know why it comes here. The four sources here I brought they're all from sort of the same Beit Midrash, as it were. Starting with the Netziv at number 19, and they're not in the order of the chronological order, but the Netziv, the last Rosh Hashiva of Volozhin, and his student, the Rav Kook, that's number 17 and 18, and the student of, or the son and student of a student who is of the same generation, one generation later, is Rav Moshe Feinstein in his tshuva, and so they're all coming from the same Beit Midrash, as it were. And they come with very similar type of ideas that come up as to the nature of who is the Kanai. So I'll just start with the last one, which is meaning not on the sheet, but number 16, the last one, Rav Moshe Feinstein. He was asked by his son-in-law, one of the Shishgal, the tshuva is dated in 1957. Just ask a general question. Right? By the way, Igrot Moshe are just that. They're letters. So a lot of things in the Igrot Moshe are his responses to people. Right? And then he organized it based on the topics. So he felt that Kenaim Pogim bo had its place in Even HaEzer. So it's in the first volume of Even HaEzer. And this is and the question was a very simple question. It was just simply like, tell me about Kenaim Pogim bo. That's really what it was. A very open, quiet type of question. Apparently, we don't have the the first letter that he's responding to, because it's clear that he had said certain ideas, some of which Moshe agreed with, some of which he disagreed with. But in any event, he says the following. This is the opening paragraph. Hinei vadai ha'emet kasher katavta b'shem Hagon Shlomo Hyman Zatzal shelo hutar ze elo likana'in. In other words, you have to be a person who is considered to be a kana'i. Shehu keteperish Rashi b'Sanhedrin daf pei aleph b'nei adam ksherim hamitkanim kinato shel makom pogin bo ayin sham. So to be a kana'i, you have to be a person. I don't know. You don't go to kana'i school, but what you do is you have to be a person who really is basically a kosher individual in every manner, shape, and form. And then you see what needs to be done, but it's going, if you will, and we're going to see it even more explicitly in the other source, it's going against the grain. V'imu l'chavana acheret, harei eino kanai, v'lo hutar lo, u'memela hu rotzeach mamash. In other words, you have to really be sure of yourself here. In other words, if you are acting too emotionally, if you have any motivations that are not, he happens to be the person that you have a legal dispute with, right? And then you do it, so then you are a murderer. Now, of course, only God really knows what's in your heart. Right? I claim I'm a Kenaim. How are you going to go and kill me? Prove that I'm not a Kenaim. So he goes further in subsequent paragraphs and he says that if we know this is a person who's not such a tzaddik, right? So then the burden of proof is upon him, in the sense that there's a question: can someone kill the Kenaim on his way to kill the person? And then, under those circumstances, is that person judged for murder or not? So, anyway, the point is that you have to be a Kenaim, it's not such a simple thing. This gets back to what you asked with regard to Shimon and Levi before. Okay, because Shimon and Levi, what happens it could be that Yaakov doesn't know. Right? Everything works out well with Shechem. There's a great medrash, one of my favorite midrashim, maybe my favorite. There's a 5-word medrash. That's why I like it. It's very, very short. Because it says, Shimon v'Levi achim, that's the pasuk, brothers. So the medrash says the following, achim l'dina v'lo liYosef. End of medrash. In other words, what that medrash is saying, right, so powerful. That medrash is saying, the last 50 years I didn't know, because everything worked out perfectly when you killed Shechem. And I was afraid that we were going to be slaughtered, and we walked away, and nothing happened to us. Right? And we prospered. Everything was good. Right? But when I now know that you were plotting to kill Yosef, and we know that because they're the brothers who Reuven tries to save them, Yehuda does save him, so it has to be that Shimon and Levi are the two who are saying, let's kill him. So now I know that you didn't work even in Shechem, you didn't do it l'shem shamayim. Now I know that you're just hotheads. And that's why I can curse you now. Right? That's what that medrash is saying. And that's what Rav Moshe is saying in this tshuva. Right? He's saying, if you're doing it, if you have any ulterior motivations whatsoever, then you're not a Kenaim. Then you're just a hothead vigilante, and we have no place for you. This is, as I said, we see the same type of idea in Rav Kook, number 17, in the it's his parish to the Siddur. So, in the introduction to Brit Milah, there's a passage which talks about Pinchas and Eliyahu, and why do we have a Kisei Shel Eliyahu, and Pinchas is associated with Eliyahu. Eliyahu is also a Kenaim. So he talks a little bit about Kanaut there in his parish, and he says, "Av Kadosh Baruch Hu Yachzor v'Hodiu L'Kol Shetivo Shel Pinchas Hu Kiteva Zkano Aaron HaKohen." Right? Why does God have to say Noten lo briti shalom. Why do I have to give Pinchas a covenant of peace? Because he is Aharon. Hatov v'ahuv l'kol rodef hashalom uvvadai rachok me'ritzicha. The last thing that Pinchas was, according to Rav Kook, it's not so, I don't know, it's a pshat necessarily, but that Pinchas was basically a person of peace. V'haya ma'aseu zeh neged tivo v'rak l'shem shamayim. In other words, to be a kanai, you have to be a person who by definition is not a kanai. Then you can act because of the situation in front of you, and you have to do what goes against your personality. But if your personality is one of violence, so then that's not acceptable at all. As I said, I think that it all stems from the Nitziv. And with this we'll close. The Nitziv says in his parish to at the beginning of Parshat Pinchas at Briti Shalom, Bischar sheiniach kaso v'chamato shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu bircho b'midat HaShalom shelo yakpid v'lo yagiz. So he gets a brit of peace that he shouldn't be an angry person afterwards. Ubishvil, why is this? Ki teva ha'maaseh she'asa Pinchas laharog nefesh biyado haya noten la'ashir b'lev haregesh az gam achar kach. Was Pinchas, the action is going to impact on Pinchas. So if Pinchas was a nice, he's part of the Eidah until that moment. Now he kills someone, killed two people, right? So he needs the covenant of peace that he doesn't become a vigilante in his own persona. That's what the bris is for, he says. The haregesh ba'asher haya l'shem shamayim mishum hachi ba habracha sheyeh tamid b'nachad v'midat shalom. Since it was done l'shem shamayim, since it was against his own inner self, so then he gets the bracha that it won't impact him negatively in the future. And B'ezrat Hashem, with everything that's going on in the world around us, that whatever vigilantism is done, if it's done, and shouldn't be done. But if it is done, it should only be done truly l'shem shamayim and not for any other motivation.
You ended this very well. I was really worried almost the whole show because I'm thinking